Laura Branigan's our artist of the day. She sounds so 80s. This one's called Spanish Eddie and hit number 26, where I'm learning a lot today, too, about our artist of the day. Laura Branigan. Now, everybody knows this guy that we got joining us. When it comes to college football, he's the name you go to. It's Phil Steele from Phil Steele Magazine. Phil, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How about you guys today?
Good. I gotta, before we get into the X's and O's and exact teams and stuff, I want to get into the ACC with you about, do you see the ACC as being a viable, football conference moving forward with everything that's going on with Florida State and Clemson? Are they going to be able to stay together?
I tell you what, if you would have asked me 2 years ago, is the Pac-12 going to stay together, I would have said yes, absolutely. I have no clue what's going to happen in conference realignment. I mean, I'm surprised that there's no Pac-12, and I'm surprised at the stuff that's going on with the Clemson, the Florida State, and if they leave. So it's going to be interesting to see how everything shakes out. I wish I could give you a firm opinion.
Let me ask you this, though. What does the ACC, they struggled, they couldn't get a team in the playoff last year. What does the ACC look like without those two teams?
Yeah, it definitely would be. But I'll say this. Remember when Texas and Oklahoma were saying they were leaving the Big 12? I said at that point, well, the Big 12's toast. I mean, how are they going to survive without Texas and Oklahoma? And yet they bring in 4 teams from the Pac-12 and look pretty strong. We'll have to see how it shakes out.
On expansion, the ACC added 3 new teams yesterday, and one team's name I keep seeing pop up everywhere as a dark horse is SMU. What kind of program is SMU for football, and do they have a legitimate chance of contending this year in the ACC?
I do think they have a legitimate chance of contending. When you look at the SMU last year, they were dominant in the American Conference. They won their home games by an average of 52-13. They were dominant offensively and defensively. They got Preston Stone at quarterback. At running back, they've got Jalen Knighton, L.J. Johnson, Cam Wheaton. All these guys are top-notch running backs, a dangerous receiving core. And the defense is solid. Last year, they only gave up 304 yards per game. Now, they're taking a big step up in schedule from last year. I expect their defense, for example, to allow about a touchdown more per game, but that's still only allowing 25. And when you look at their schedule this year, they do have a pretty decent schedule for stepping into the ACC. They avoid a lot of the big boys, and they only play of the big boys. They only face Louisville and Florida State. So I think SMU's got a shot at stepping into contention in their first year.
SMU is your national champion next year. Phil Steele just said that. Now, about the other two with Cal and Stanford, how do you see them fitting into the ACC this year? What are their chances of competing and potentially getting to bowl eligibility?
Well, I think with Stanford, they're a vastly more experienced team than last year. I mean, last year they lost a ton. This year they've got practically everybody back, which is good. But they had a lot of ground to make up. I still put them right towards the bottom of the ACC. I think it's going to be rebuilding year number 2 for Troy Taylor. Now, as far as making a bowl game goes, I do think Cal has a really good shot at getting to a bowl. They've got one of the best running backs in the country in Jade Knott. They added Chandler Rogers coming in from North Texas, who's going to battle Mendoza at the quarterback position. They're solid at the offensive line. Wilcox's defense have been down. I'm talking about Justin Wilcox, their head coach, has been down a little bit the last couple of years, but I look for them to be improved. He's a defensive-minded head coach. And then you look at their schedule, I probably have them right around the 6 to 7 win category. So I think they have a good chance of getting to a bowl game in their first year here.
Who do you got as your front runners for the ACC?
I've got a 3-way tie at the top. I've got Clemson, which I know Dabo Swinney is getting a lot of harassment. Hey, you're not using the transfer portal. But if you're not losing players to the transfer portal and you're keeping the same culture, what's wrong with just keeping the players you recruited? And I think Clemson has the talent. And keep in mind, last year they lost 4 games, but last year they had a 94-60 first down edge in those 4 games. The Florida State game turned on a fumble return for a touchdown. They missed a field goal at the end. Didn't trail a single second of regulation, yet lost that game. I think Clemson's very dangerous. Florida State, I thought they lost a ton from last year, which they did, but Mike Norvell's done a good job in the transfer portal, bringing bringing in the new players. And when I went over the team with Coach Norvell, he feels that this team might be his most talented, even more talented than last year. Key's going to be the quarterback. They got to get DJ Uiagalelei to have a big year at the QB position. And then watch out for Miami. They've got the best schedule of the front runners this year. Mario Cristobal's done a tremendous job building this team. They add in a Cam Ward, a quarterback from Washington State, Damian Martinez, a running back from Oregon State to go along with their dangerous receivers. The defense is solid. And as mentioned, they've got probably the best schedule of the front runners in the ACC.
You know, a lot has been said of scheduling for Syracuse. Some say the worst in college football, or the easiest in college football. Where do you see Syracuse's schedule landing?
I've got it number 60 in the country, which is pretty low for a Power 4 conference. I like the first half of the schedule. In fact, you could probably favor Syracuse will be favored in their first 5 games of the year. And if you open up 5-0, then the belief comes in for a new head coach. That's generally what happens if new head coaches have success early on. So they'll probably be favored in their first 5 games. Now, I'm not wild about the second half of the schedule. They've got to play Pitt, Boston College, Cal, all on the road, and I think all 3 of those are potential bowl teams. They also play NC State on the road, and they host Miami of Florida and Virginia Tech, 2 of the top teams in the ACC. So they're going to have to take care of business in the second half of the year. But, yeah, the opening part of the schedule looks great.
That sounds like a familiar problem for Syracuse that they've had
every year.
They start off hot. And, well, what is your take on Syracuse with Fran Brown being here? You know, it's weird to be in Syracuse. It's kind of everybody's starstruck by all these players that are coming in, and we're not used to seeing this level of talent coming to Syracuse. But then we look at the national media, and everybody's got them 9th or 10th in the ACC still. Why is that from a national point of view?
You know, I think part of it is due to the schedule I just mentioned. There'll probably be an underdog at home against Miami of Florida and home against Virginia Tech, and then they're going to have to make some hay on the road to get the wins. But when I look at Syracuse, I do like the talent. I mean, bringing in a Kyle McCord at QB, outstanding. Getting a Rondé Gatson back at wide receiver / tight end, I think is a big plus for this team, and probably one that's underrated. But adding a Justin Ross Simmons from Colorado State, Zeed Haynes from Georgia at the receiving core, and then defensively adding some of the players that they did. This is a team that has a great upgrade in talent over last year. They're a lot more experienced than last year as well, and I think they're a threat. And yeah, I got to tell you, guys, it is tough picking a 17-team conference. Haven't had to do that in the history of the magazine, and I even had an 18-team conference to pick this year. And you know, you pick a team 10th, as you're still above 7 teams. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you could like a team a lot and put them 9th or 10th. That's the funny part about the way this all works now. But your point about Kyle McCord, I want to get your thoughts on where you think he is in terms of the ACC quarterbacks and how good you think he is, because when he came to Syracuse, the fan base was pretty hyped, pretty excited about getting Ohio State starting quarterback to come to Syracuse. But then you look at some national prognostications and rankings in terms of ACC quarterbacks, and they got him middle of the pack to back end. So I'm curious where you think he fits in the ACC and how good you think he is overall.
I think he will be one of the ACC's best quarterbacks this year, clearly in the upper half of the rankings. You wonder how he's going to fit in a new system. Sometimes it takes a little time to gel in that. But he's a guy that last year threw for over 3,000 yards and had a 24-6 ratio. So, you know, talking to the coaches, they think he's a big-time player, big-time leader. You know, he's an outstanding drop-back quarterback. He's smart, he's accurate, and he can use his legs as well. So I think when you look at Kyle McCord, he'll clearly be in the upper half of the ACC.
You know, Fran Brown's the reason he's here, right? And all these players are coming here. He's never coached a game, but was at Georgia. What do you know about Fran Brown, and, you know, how do you think he will do at Syracuse?
Well, I like the fact he's coming from Georgia, because Kirby Smart, remarkable job at Georgia. What he has developed there, you know, from where Georgia was when Kirby Smart started to where he finished. And I think Fran Brown, you know, grabbed a lot of that stuff and brought it with them. So I think that's huge, having that type of experience from Georgia. And you can tell, a lot of times it's not the X's and the O's, it's the Jimmies and the Joes, and he's bringing in the Jimmies and Joes here.
What would be a successful season, do you think, for Syracuse? The fans here are thinking 8 or more. Some, I'm kind of the pump the brakes guy. What do you think would be a successful season for Fran Brown year one?
Just overall, a winning record, I think it would be a good start. But as you mentioned, I've heard a lot of hype from Syracuse fans. They're expecting a lot more this year. So I would probably put it at 8, I think would make a lot of Syracuse fans happy.
Phil, let's move on to the national side of things. Who do you like this year to make the playoff in college football?
Well, there's 12 teams, so I'm just going to go over the top 4. And my top 4, number 1, to start with Georgia. I think when you look at Georgia depth-wise, they're the best team in the country. They go 3 deep at almost every position. They've got the veteran quarterback in Carson Beck back. They got my number 1 rated offensive line in the country. They've got nasty defense. I've got Georgia number 1. Now, they do have to play Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss all on the road, and all 3 of those teams to be preseason top 10. Number 2, I got Ohio State. And Ohio State really is all in this year. They brought in some big-time transfers. They also had a lot of players turn down the NFL. They have the talent to match up with Georgia. I think that would be a great title game if they get there. I've got Ohio State number 2. Number 3, I've got Oregon. And with Oregon, Dan Lanning has done a great job building that team. They bring in Dylan Gabriel to replace Bo Nix. The receiving core is the best in the country. Offensive line's outstanding. The defense has got players like Jordan Birch up front, Jeffrey Bassett, linebacker. They are loaded, and they get Ohio State at home, which I think Oregon and Ohio State play for the Big Ten title. And then my number 4 team is Texas, and I've got them playing Georgia for the Big Ten title this year. Texas has the best quarterback room in the country with Quinn Ewers, backed by Arch Manning. They also are strong at the line of scrimmage, both offensively and defensively, and they've got good special teams as well. They get that big game against Georgia at home. They might not be an underdog in a single game this year if they all of a sudden turn to be a favorite against Georgia in that game. So I think those are your top 4 teams, but with the 12-team playoff, it is wide open this year.
My question is for my late father-in-law, who was a Michigan alum. What is your thoughts on Michigan and where they fall in the national landscape, especially with that coaching change with Jim Harbaugh no longer there?
Yeah, not only a coaching change, but also the players that they lost. I mean, last year, coming into the season, they were one of the most experienced teams in the country. And I'm going to do an article on philsteele.com next week talking about the experience chart. They were number 7 on my experience chart last year. They're now number 117 this year. And while I have no questions about Michigan's defense, I do have 2 questions. Offensive line, never a good place to have questions. They've lost all 5 starters from last year. And then quarterback. That's not another position you don't want to have questions. Alex Orji, Davis Warren, Jack Tuttle, who's the quarterback going to be? And none of them really stood out, and none of them looked to be outstanding. So with quarterback and offensive line questions, I think they probably dropped some from last year, but don't be expecting some middle-of-the-road thing here for Michigan. The only games I have an underdog in are at Ohio State and home against Texas. I got the Oregon game a toss-up. Probably a 2-3 loss season, which would be a step back, but not a major step back.
Let's go full circle on this and go back to the ACC as a whole with the 12-team playoff. How many teams do you think they're capable of getting in, and does reputation affect them at all?
I think it's going to be played out on the field this year, how the teams do on the field, whether or not they get into the 12. I do think that the SEC is a brutal conference and the Big Ten is a brutal conference. You may see 4 or 5 teams from the SEC, 3 or 4 teams from the Big Ten make it. So probably 2, I would say, for the ACC with the possibility of 3. But you got 1, the champ comes in. But I would think the ACC at least gets 2 and possibly 3.
All right, Mike, where can people get the magazine and where can they find you on the web?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Now, in years past, we've been available at Walmart, grocery stores, places like that. This year it's exclusively Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. So if you got a local Barnes & Noble there, head to it, pick up your copy today. 352 pages, like it, and 134 media guides rolled into one. Now, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million are your brick-and-mortar places, or you can go to philsteele.com. And when you go to philsteele.com and you order the hard copy, I'm going to charge you shipping, but we give you the digital magazine for free. And in this, the digital magazine's actually updated all the way through September. Give an example, the Utah State page no longer has Blake Anderson as the head coach. So it's got Nate Drilling, the new head coach there. So it's updated all the way through September, philsteele.com.
Phil, thanks for your time. Always great to have you on.
Hey, a lot of fun talking football with you guys today. Thanks for having me on.
All right, there we go. Phil Steele. That was something our listeners are not used to, Mike. I asked a lot of questions.
You did. I had to get the Michigan question in there.
Yeah, I normally do not ask questions. You really lacked where Steve carries me.
I'm sorry about that.
No, it's all right.
I told him I would throw a couple of segments.
We'll get through
keep
this.
His job safe.
I'm exhausted now. I'm going to need a nap. I'll take a time out. I'll take a 4-minute snooze. It's ESPN Radio Syracuse, Utica, Rome, and QSportsTalk.com.